kind of thinking about doing here is basically spending time on the free thinking argument, just arguing for libertarian free will and giving my argument, defending the premises, and seeing if there's any questions there. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You guys still hear me and see me all right?
Yep.
We can.
Yep.
All right. So I'm gonna go back and forth between the video and some notes. So I might not see you. So just yell at me if you want me to stop and want me to talk about anything. And by the way, John, how much time have you scheduled for tonight?
Whatever you want to go.
All right, all night. We're going to midnight.
I mean, they may drop off one at a time, but we're in for 3 hours on the Zoom side.
Oh, cool. Well, actually, I don't know if my wife would like that, but we'll definitely have some time to unpack this a bit. So first, let's just start out. I'm sure everybody here, this will be review for probably everybody, but just in case, I want to define some things. I want to start out by talking about naturalism. So this whole thing kind of morphed into a book about Molinism and how we could look at things theologically, but it didn't start that way. It started because I wanted to take down atheism and specifically naturalism. I saw that as a great threat to the church and to culture, to the world. And I would add that I do think we're seeing the results of that right now, even with what's going on in America with critical race theory and critical theory in general. That is a methodology that's used by, if people realize it or not, a Marxist ideology, and Marxism is based upon atheistic naturalism. And so, although many atheists, even like James Lindsay, who just came out with this book, Cynical Theories, talking about the problems with this cultural Marxism and critical theory and things like that. We've been arguing with, Christian apologists and new atheists have been arguing online now, and it seems like every day on social media, since Facebook came out, and before that, just on the internet in general. And now we both kind of look to the side and see, oh wow, there's a threat here, a postmodern threat that rejects reason, rejects logic, rejects mathematics, rejects science. And so both the new atheists and the Christian apologists, we've all been arguing, well, who's the most reasonable? And now we've got a threat that says they reject reason. And so now what's kind of funny is you can see these, these former enemies who are now face to face. They're facing off each other here, or facing off against each other here. Now we turn, we're side by side fighting a common enemy. But I look over at my atheistic naturalist friends now and say, well, it's your fault they're here. You opened the door for them. And but let's handle this, and then we'll get back to our arguments. But it's been pretty cool, if there's any silver lining here, to see some of these new atheists. I think of guys like Sam Harris, for example, who now see that this critical theory and cultural Marxism is a big problem. Now, with that said, it was guys like Sam Harris who offered the initial catalyst for me to want to go down this route, to take down this atheistic naturalism. Like I said, it did turn into much more than that. And, this book here, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge and Mere Molinism, just came out Friday on Amazon, and it is #1 right now, has been since Friday, in philosophical theology, or philosophical, or religion and philosophy, I guess. So it did turn into a theological project as well, but it started with just me focusing on the problems with naturalism. So what is naturalism? Quick review. Naturalism is a view that only nature exists. So if only nature exists, then things other than nature don't exist. So that means there's no God, there's no angels, there's no human soul, only the kinds of stuff that scientists could test or possibly discover That's all that exists. So if nature is all, and focus on that word all, if nature is all that exists, then that means that everything about humanity and everything about you would be caused and determined by the forces and past events of nature, like physics and chemistry, for example. But if physics and chemistry are running the entire show, then that means that physics and chemistry caused and determined everything about you. But if that's the case, then that means that physics and chemistry always causes and determines exactly what you think of and about and exactly how you think of and about it. And that how is really important. I mean, the what you think of and about, that's important, but the how you think of and about it, that's going to cause some major problems here. So if physics and chemistry all determines exactly what you think of and about and exactly how you think of and about it, then here's what follows. If the forces of nature cause and determine you to hold and affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to reach a better belief, let alone the truth. So now this is going to cause some rationality problems and some problems for knowledge, at least inferential knowledge. But here's the deal. You can reach true beliefs, right? I mean, we know that we can, that I have the power to reach true beliefs, to engage in the process of rationality, to decide what I ought to believe. Now, if one wants to reject this, I mean, do you really want to say that you cannot reach true beliefs, that you do not have the power to reach true beliefs? I mean, that would mean that you just reached the belief. That would mean that you just reached the true belief that you cannot reach true beliefs. So that's gibberish. That's just crazy talk and incoherent nonsense. So here's what we can conclude. Since you can reach better and true beliefs, right? You're not forced to hold false beliefs, at least not all the time. Then it follows that not all of your beliefs are caused and determined by the forces and past events of nature or anything else for that matter. And that would include God. And that's where I make a shift and discuss that in my book as well. So I go after determinism, exhaustive determinism, whether it be, I started out by just going after the atheistic naturalists, and then I realized, and I used to be a Calvinist who held to exhaustive divine determinism. I realized, wow, the Christian who holds to exhaustive divine determinism has the exact same problems, but for different reasons. So in my book, then I go after both views. So this means that you have free will, namely free will in a libertarian sense. And that means that you seem to be more than just nature. That is to say that there seems to be something other than nature about you, or supernatural, as it were, about humanity, about you. And I contend that the best explanation for this free thinking that you have the ability to do, and the supernatural ability, the best explanation of that is God, and more specifically, the biblical view of God. So if we have time, I'll get into that today too, about why the biblical view of God is the best explanation of all the data. Now, that's just a quick flyover of some of the stuff we're going to be discussing tonight. So this really comes down to what it means and what does it take to be a free thinker. So before I go on, is there any questions about just that introduction that I just gave? I haven't really given an argument yet, but any questions on or clarification on terms? Are we good? All right, going once, going twice, and we will keep moving. So what does it mean to be a free thinker? You probably heard, but atheists like to label themselves as free thinkers. And I realized that after talking with them for a while, that they really don't have access to that term. But I realized that Christians do. And so I'm trying to steal that name back, or at least take that term back, free thinkers, And that's why I started the ministry or the organization called Free Thinking Ministries. And our YouTube channel, we got Free Thinking Ministries, the YouTube channel, but our show on there is called Free Think or Die. So it's the atheist doesn't have rights to it, and I'll explain why. So atheists label themselves as free thinkers, but if one thinks about it, at least if they're free to do so, if atheists happen to be right that God does not exist, then it's also highly implausible that an immaterial or a supernatural aspect of humanity exists, something that's other than nature. Now, I say you can call that whatever you want. I call it a soul, all right? So if I'm going to talk about an aspect of human nature that is other than nature, that is other than nature, I'm going to call that a soul. And if people don't like that for some reason, I say fine, call it what you will, but a rose by any other name smells just as sweet. So this has led me to the conclusion that it's impossible for an atheistic naturalist anyway to really be a free thinker. I mean, sure, they can join the club and call themselves free thinkers, but if they happen to be right about atheistic naturalism, then no one can freely think anything. Now, if God does not exist, it's hard to see how anyone could ever freely think about good evidence and argumentation and choose to deliberate and think rationally to come to the most logical conclusions. And this is demonstrated in an argument I crafted after dwelling upon what it means to freely think in a libertarian sense. Now, before I share that argument, called the free thinking argument, I should probably explain what I mean by a libertarian sense. I'm sure some watching tonight already know this, but there might be some who don't really understand. In fact, I would say that many people who think they understand libertarian freedom, they might understand parts of it, but maybe they don't understand the different ways, several manners in which it can be properly defined. So, libertarian freedom. Here's two different definitions. One, a person who has an ability to do otherwise possesses libertarian freedom. This is, in the literature, it would be what is called the principle of alternative possibilities, PAP, the PAP, the principle of alternative possibilities, otherwise known as the ability to do otherwise. So that's the first thing. If somebody has the ability to do otherwise, congratulations, you have libertarian freedom. All right, the other definition is this: a person who is simply uncaused or not causally determined possesses libertarian freedom. Now, unlike the PAP or the principle of alternative possibilities, this is called sourcehood libertarian freedom. And it simply means that if you ever, at any point in your life, are not causally determined by something other than you, then congratulations, you've got libertarian freedom. Now that means even if for some weird reason you still can't do otherwise, but you're not causally determined by something or someone else, you've still got libertarian freedom. So think about it this way: if I can demonstrate that a person at least sometimes, right? I'm not talking about all the time. I'm not talking exhaustively here. If I can demonstrate that a person at least sometimes at some moment possesses the ability to think or act otherwise, then I've demonstrated that this person possesses libertarian freedom or libertarian free will. Now, with that said, suppose that I can't prove that this person has the ability to do otherwise, but I can prove that there are no causal strings attached to that person. All right, I can't prove the ability to do otherwise. Maybe they've got it. I don't know. But I can prove that there are no causal strings attached to that person. Well, if I've done that much, then I've shown that this person is still free in the libertarian sense. So just keep in mind, the most important is sourcehood freedom. If I can show, because if you've got the ability to do otherwise, then you've got sourcehood freedom. But if for some reason you don't have the ability to do otherwise, or I can't show that you've got the ability to do otherwise, but I can show that you're the source of your actions, congratulations, you've got libertarian free will. Now, there is a specific definition of libertarian freedom that I like to defend, right? And I don't claim that it must always pass, but I do argue that this is sometimes true. And that is this version. I simply say that libertarian freedom is the ability to choose between or among a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with one's nature at a given moment. So the key word there, well, there's several key words, but one that I want you to focus on is compatible, right? Because we often see people called compatibilists who argue that they argue against libertarian freedom. They say that that compatibilism would be the thesis that determinism is true and free will and or responsibility can still entail. Now, I argue that that view, that thesis, cannot describe reality all the time, even if it can describe reality at some moments. So I argue in my book, I argue against compatibilism being exhaustive or describing reality exhaustively, if that makes sense. I don't dispute that it could not ever be the case. Like, for example, if I go to a restaurant, when I look at the menu, I think I'm trying to see what I desire the most at that given moment, and based on my nature, that's probably always what I order from the menu. But I show that that can't always describe reality. So again, I usually defend this, that libertarian freedom is the ability to choose between or among a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with one's nature at a given moment. So libertarian freedom is not the ability to do something that's not compatible with your nature. The libertarian, unlike the historical compatibilist, simply says there's multiple options at certain times in which we're free to choose that are each compatible with our nature. And the compatibilist, the traditional compatibilist would say, there's always and only one option at each moment. And I say, well, why think a thing like that? Now they've got the burden of proof, and I'm going to offer arguments against that view. But anyway, let me move on. Let's get back to naturalists. So libertarianism, or libertarian free will, libertarian freedom, is rejected by most of the world's leading naturalists today. So I think, and not all, I quote some in my book who would disagree, but the vast majority would reject libertarianism, who would say they're naturalists. So I'm thinking of, let's throw out the famous names that we all know of: Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Alex Rosenberg, Jerry Coyne, Sean Carroll, Dan Barker, who my friend, colleague, and boss Braxton Hunter just debated on this topic a few weeks ago. I'd encourage you guys to watch that debate. And of course, we got Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking, I should say, and also the late Will Provine. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but most naturalists in the West reject libertarian freedom because they believe that all that exists is nature, and if that's the case, then all that exists is caused and determined by the forces and events of nature. So therefore, you would not have libertarian freedom. Now, so remember what a naturalist is, as I mentioned at the beginning. A naturalist is one who simply affirms the proposition that all that exists is nature. So things that could possibly be tested or discovered through the scientific method or empirical means, that's all that exists. And since God, by definition, is other than nature, because he would be the creator of all nature and therefore must be, by definition, other than nature, then these naturalists presuppose, and catch that, they presuppose that God does not exist, because they presuppose and assume all that exists is nature. So they're kind of presuppers here. They're presuppositionalists. And it's kind of funny because they really go after Christians who are presuppositionalists. So do I. But they're presupposing that all that exists is nature. It's not a conclusion that's typically been reached. It's an assumed presupposition. So just to be clear, all naturalists are atheists. However, although the majority of atheists seem to be naturalists, one could be an atheist and still think that some immaterial or supernatural realities exist. And if I understand Buddhism correctly, I think that would count. At least most Buddhists would probably reject the idea of God, but they would still believe in supernatural realities. But the vast majority of atheists, or I should say the vast majority of naturalists, are atheists. But you could be an atheist and still hold a supernatural reality. So with that clarified, let's focus on these naturalistic atheists because they permeate our society and the college campuses today. These atheists often argue that free will in a libertarian sense is nothing but an illusion. So I mentioned Stephen Hawking earlier. Let me get his quote up here. He said, it's hard to imagine how free will can operate if our behavior is determined by physical law. So it seems that we are no more than biological machines and that free will is just an illusion. Human behavior is indeed determined by the laws of nature, and our actions are as determined as the orbits of the planets. End quote. Now, the new atheist philosopher, who I mentioned earlier, he's also a neuroscientist, a best-selling author. I would love to sell books like he does. Sam Harris agrees with Stephen Hawking here. Now, I got to say that Sam Harris is probably my favorite atheist. I really like the guy. But he did, I would say, if there was anybody that provided the catalyst for me to do my master's thesis at Biola, which led to my doctoral dissertation at Northwest University, which then led to this book, it's Sam Harris. I quote him, I think, either on the first or second page and quote him throughout and quote him at the very end. So with that said, I like the guy a lot. But let me read to you a key quote from his book entitled Free Will, where he argues that we do not have free will. This is what he says, quote, "Free will is an illusion. Our wills are simply not of our own making. Thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which we are unaware and over which we exert no conscious control. We do not think, or we do not have the freedom we think we have. Either our wills," and think about this, not to mention our thoughts and beliefs, right? But he says, either our wills are determined by prior causes and we are not responsible for them, or they are the product of chance and we are not responsible for them, end quote. But think about what he says there. He says thoughts, your very thoughts, all of them, and your intentions, what you think of and about, and how you think of and about it. That's called intentionality. So your thoughts and intentions, Sam Harris says, emerge from background causes of which we are unaware and over which we exert no conscious control. Think about that. Let that sink in. That means everything you think, including when you try to examine your own thoughts and beliefs, guess what? You're not doing it. Something else you're not aware of is doing it. All of it. And that is a major problem. Indeed, it seems that a majority of atheists and naturalists agree that things external to humanity govern and control about humanity. And so according to them, this causal determination, as Sam Harris made clear, would include, what are the things that are caused and determined? All of the thoughts, all of the wills, and all of your intentions. They're all causally determined by things other than you. Now, Harris and company are saying that something other than humanity, other than you, is causing and determining all the thoughts and beliefs in your head right now, and every other thought you'll ever have. All of your thoughts about your beliefs and all of your beliefs about your thoughts, and so on and so forth. It's all determined and caused by something else that is not what you refer to as I. So here's the rub. If all of your thoughts and intentions are always caused and determined by external factors, then something other than you always causally determines exactly what you think of and about and exactly how you think of and about it. That's so important. I think I've already said that, but I want to say it again because you gotta grasp this. If all thoughts and intentions are caused and determined by external factors, then something other than the self, the thing a person refers to as I, right? Something other than the self always causally determines exactly what a person thinks of and about and exactly how he thinks of and about it. But nevertheless, naturalists, again, the majority of atheists often proclaim that libertarian freedom or simply free will is an illusion, and then they claim to be free thinkers. So that doesn't make sense. But this raises a couple questions. Do humans actually have this kind of free will, this libertarian freedom? And if so, how would we know? So as I see it, of all the arguments that have been developed in support of libertarian freedom, and I offer several of them here in this book. So I encourage you to get it. There's multiple arguments, but I'm going to hang out on one or two of them today. The book is again, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism. But there's one argument that I think seems to rule them all. And this reason stems from the very ability to reason. And, you know, with that said, I've argued that human beliefs can be rationally affirmed or argued rationally only if humans possess libertarian freedom. So it did start back in 2012, I think, when I was attending Biola University. It might have started a little bit before that, but the first time I wrote it down on paper, I was in Scott Smith's class. John, you had Scott, right? Are you there?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Isn't he great?
He is.
If it wasn't for Scott Smith, I probably wouldn't have gone down this journey. But I was in his classroom when I first wrote it down on paper. And it started out as a simple three-step syllogism that I originally called the free thinking argument. And it just goes like this: two premises, one conclusion. So premise one, it's changed, I should say. I've strengthened the premises and worded them differently as time has gone on to make it a stronger syllogism. But here is the current form of the original argument. Let's see. So premise one, if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Premise two, humans do possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Conclusion, therefore, humans possess libertarian freedom. So this is a short syllogism that should get one's attention because it deductively concludes something that's been debated for centuries. So if this argument stands, and I believe it does, in fact, one philosopher said that he thinks that this is the most powerful metaphysical argument that he's ever seen, especially once the premises are defended, then this centuries-long, centuries-old debate is finally over. We can say, humans at least occasionally possess libertarian freedom. And to deny it will be to affirm it, as we will soon see. But so, it was cool. I had a short little syllogism there, but I wasn't content with just, with merely demonstrating that humans possess libertarian freedom occasionally. I sensed that more was available to uncover, and I was right. And so Dr. Smith, I would say he kind of helped expand this a bit. So I simply then added two additional premises after talking with him and him challenging me to think about some concepts. Is that me that's going off like that? Let me see if I got my do not disturb on. All right, sorry about that. So, okay, I added two additional premises, which gave us then two additional deductive conclusions and one abductive conclusion at the end. So in total, with this new argument, I get three deductive conclusions and one abductive conclusion. So I'll talk about that here in a bit. But this expanded argument expanded from the free thinking argument, is now what I call the free thinking argument against naturalism. So this argument goes like this. This is an 8-step syllogism. So hang with me, if you will. But premise 1 says, if naturalism is true, human nature does not include an immaterial soul. 2, if human nature does not include an immaterial soul, then humans do not possess libertarian freedom. 3, if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. That was premise 1 of the original argument. Premise 4, humans do possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. That was premise 2 of the original argument. Here's step 5, which is a deductive conclusion. Therefore, humans possess libertarian freedom. 6, here's another deductive conclusion. Therefore, human nature includes an immaterial soul. And 7, therefore, naturalism is false. Right? Those are all deductive conclusions. Now here is the abductive conclusion, which states the best explanation of human libertarian freedom and the soul is the biblical view of God. That's abductive, okay? So, an abductive conclusion doesn't follow deductively. That's why it's called abductive and not deductive. So it's not as strong as a deductive conclusion, but it's simply the best explanation of all the data. And really, I think it's just the beginning of a new argument that one can add to the deductive conclusions of the free thinking argument against naturalism, but it is based on the deductive conclusions of the free thinking argument against naturalism. So for the time being, let's focus on steps 1 through 7. And if we have time, I'll discuss why the best explanation of the soul and libertarian free will is the biblical view of God. But we'll see. So this syllogism is a structurally valid deductive syllogism through step 7. But is it a sound argument? You know, are the premises true? That's the question. So let's see if we have good reason to think the premises are true, or at least if they're likely true, because that's all you need for a good deductive syllogism, is to think, yeah, these premises are probably true. They're better than their negation is really all you need. But I think we can get stronger than that. But let's take a look. So premise 1 says if naturalism is true, human nature does not include an immaterial soul. That is synonymous with if naturalism is true, nature is all that exists. So that's true by definition, right? I've not really ever had an atheist try to get out of that one. I can think of one guy that briefly tried to argue that because he realized he couldn't argue any of the other premises. But usually nobody's going to deny that because it's true by definition. All right, premise 2. Let me read premise 2 to you again. Premise 2 says, if human nature does not include an immaterial soul or a supernatural soul, whatever, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally, or no, I'm sorry. If human nature does not include an immaterial soul, then humans do not possess libertarian freedom. All right, what does that mean? That just simply means that if all that exists is nature, then everything about humanity is causally determined by forces and events outside of human control. These things might include, for example, the forces of nature like physics and chemistry, the initial conditions of the Big Bang, perhaps some quantum events. Now, a few atheists would disagree with premise 2. In fact, most atheists affirm it, right? If you recall, this is exactly the case that Sam Harris made and his colleagues, his atheist colleagues make today. They're the ones that defend that premise of my argument. So I say, thank you, atheists, come on in and defend this argument for me. So I'm simply taking what these atheists say is the case, and then I make it a premise in my argument. So I really don't need to defend it much because they defend it for me. In fact, they write entire books defending this premise. Thank you, Sam Harris. So let's move to the next premise. Premise 3 is usually the first one to be attacked, and I think that's a huge mistake. This premise, let me read to you premise 3 again. Premise 3 says, if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. So what does that mean? It basically, man, I think this is me that's beeping. Yep, it's because I got Facebook open. Close. Should stop doing that now. Sorry about that. All right, what does premise 3 mean? Premise 3 is it basically communicates the fact that, pay attention to this, if something outside of human control causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief. Right? I mean, that seems indisputable. Let me say it again. If something outside of human control causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief. So if all things are outside of human control, then this includes exactly what every human always thinks of and about, and exactly how each human always thinks of and about it. So that is to say, if all things are causally determined by something other than humanity, then that includes all the thoughts and beliefs held by humanity. And if a person's thoughts and beliefs are forced upon him and he could not have chosen better thoughts and beliefs, then he is simply left passively assuming, not that he could do otherwise, that his determined thoughts and beliefs are good and that his beliefs are true. And if that's the case, then no one could ever rationally affirm or rationally argue that his beliefs really are the inference to the best explanation. This could only be assumed. And this assumption would likewise be caused and determined and forced upon him by something other than him. It's not like he could assume otherwise. So this is a big problem for the atheistic naturalist who affirms exhaustive determinism, or merely that all things about humanity are causally determined. And this is the case because if determinism is true, then atheists, or anyone else for that matter, cannot possess justification for their beliefs. Now, we're going to get into epistemology. And this is where things get worse for the atheist, because to make matters worse, if justification is required for knowledge, or for at least some kinds of knowledge, then knowledge or some kinds of knowledge becomes illusory. If justification is required for knowledge, and typically it is, according to most philosophers and epistemologists, and I think they're right. So atheists are saying that free will is an illusion, and I'm saying, okay, well, if that's the case, then rationality and knowledge gained via the use of reason are also illusions, right? So if you're going to say that free will is an illusion, then it follows that rationality and knowledge gained via the use of reason are also illusions. So let's talk about justification and epistemology here. Epistemologists often define knowledge in the simplest terms as justified true belief. Now, some contend that more might be required than that those three words. But most will say that you need these three ingredients, or at least these three ingredients, to possess what I refer to as reason-based knowledge, which seems to be what might be the most valuable kinds of knowledge. So think about it like this. Socrates noted that a true belief is good, but it falls short of knowledge. Now, knowledge has greater value than mere true belief because it's rationally grounded, or it's tied, if you will. It's tied down to the ground by a tether, is how he explained it. So knowledge has greater value. I mean, true beliefs are good. They're great. congratulations if you hold a true belief. But it's not knowledge until it's rationally grounded or tied down to the ground, whereas mere true belief is ungrounded. Think about these a helium balloon, right? Helium balloon, that string from the helium balloon that's tying it down is the justification or the rational grounding. It ties it to the ground. But if that's not there, it just flies off. It flies off in the wind. So this is what Socrates said, that knowledge is true belief plus a rational account to ground the belief. So here's this quote. He says, "True opinions are a fine thing and do all sorts of good so long as they stay in their place. But they will not stay long. They run away from a man's mind, so they're not worth much until you tether them by working out the reason. And once they're tied down, they become knowledge and are stable. This is why knowledge is something more valuable than right opinion. What distinguishes one from the other is the tether," end quote. So I like to refer to this process of rationality leading to reason-based knowledge as the steps one takes while deciding what one ought to believe and what one ought to affirm. So focus on the word ought, all right? The process of rationality leading to reason-based knowledge refers to the steps one takes while deciding what you ought to believe and what you ought to affirm, right? Do you have that ability to decide what you ought to believe and what you ought to affirm? And if you don't, then you're at an epistemic loss. If exhaustive determinism is true and something other than you causally determines everything about you, then you are not taking these rational steps. They are being determined for you by something other than you, and that's the big problem when it comes to justification. So to put justification in terms that those who might be new to the subject might be able to relate to, think about 3 students in a math class. The teacher gives the students a multiple choice quiz of a complex story problem to see if they know, if they possess knowledge how to solve the story problem. Now, the first student was like me in high school. Did not understand the math problem at all or the story problem at all. I hated story problems back in the day. But luckily, guess what? It's a multiple choice test. He's got A, B, C, or D to choose from after reading the story problem. And he circles C. Guess what? He got it right. Right? The first student didn't understand, but luckily happens to guess the correct answer. He circles the correct answer, but question, does he know the answer? Does he possess knowledge? Of course not. Well, the next student, the next guy doesn't understand the problem either, but he looks on his neighbor's quiz, hoping that she got it right. And he sees that she circled C, and so he does the same thing. He cheats, saw that she circled C, he's going to do the same thing because he knows she's normally pretty smart. So guess what? The answer is correct. But does he know the answer? Does he possess knowledge? Of course not. He's a cheater. Well, finally, the last student not only understands the problem just fine, but she shows her work in the margins, right, leading to the correct answer. Now, the fact that she showed her work is the tether that demonstrates to her teacher and to herself that she possesses knowledge of reality. She was the one taking certain steps to see if she could figure it out. Now, one may happen to possess true beliefs, right? That first student, he could say, this is what I believe. The second student could say, this is what I believe. Well, guess what? If they affirm that C is true, they've got a true belief. However, if he doesn't possess a proper justification or a tether for a specific belief, and his true beliefs are simply based on luck or cheating, right, his belief does not qualify as a knowledge claim, even if it happens to be true. Now, if one can't freely think and infer the best explanation among a range of alternative options that are each compatible with one's nature, then there can be no justification that their specific belief really is the best explanation. Right? The belief is not tethered to reality. It's not tied down, as it were. So without justification, rationally inferred and affirmed knowledge goes down the drain. All that remains is question-begging assumptions. So ultimately, if naturalistic determinism is true, then all human thoughts and beliefs are causally determined by the forces of nature, the initial conditions of the Big Bang, past events, perhaps some quantum events, some quantum mechanics, and all other kinds of things outside of human control. And let me add this major point. Since these naturalistic events are not intentionally aimed at truth, and these naturalistic events would determine all of your thoughts and beliefs, then your thoughts and beliefs are not reliable in the sense of being truth conducive. And this is especially the case when it comes to metaphysical or theological views like naturalism is true or God does not exist, right? So those beliefs are caused and determined by things that are not intentionally aimed at truth if naturalism is true, you see. That's a big problem. So let me clarify it by stating it like this. One cannot determine what he ought to believe if something else determines what he will believe, right? You cannot determine what you ought to believe if something or someone else determines what you will believe. Now, to illustrate that point, consider what I refer to as a mad scientist thought experiment. Philosophers love to use mad scientists and thought experiments quite a bit. So you might have heard of some of these before. This is my own unique mad scientist thought experiment. It's pretty simple. It doesn't take very long. So suppose somehow, I don't know how the mad scientist did it, but the mad scientist somehow gets access to your brain. You know, when you were asleep, perhaps he implanted some microchips up your nose or in your ear or something. And now, unbeknownst to you, he exhaustively controls and causally determines all of your thoughts and beliefs all the time. Now, this includes exactly everything, right? This includes exactly what you think of and about and exactly how you think of and about it. All, that key word there, all of your thoughts about your beliefs and all of your beliefs about your thoughts are caused and determined by the mad scientist. This also includes the next words that are going to come out of your mouth. So question, how can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, or probably true? Right? Note the range of alternative options from which to choose. How can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, or probably true? There's probably some more I could add there, without begging the question or reasoning in a circle, which is a logical fallacy. Good luck with that. It's impossible. Now, why is that impossible? Because whatever you say in response is not you. It's the mad scientist, remember. So go ahead and object. Say anything in response to this thought experiment. Guess what? It's not you. It's the mad scientist. So I don't want to talk to the mad scientist. Where did you go? I want to talk to you, you see. Do you see the problem, or is the mad scientist keeping you from seeing the problem? You know, now this leads some atheists to deny their own existence, which gets crazy here. I mean, think about it. To deny the existence of God and be consistent all the way through is leading many of them to deny their own existence. But is that consistency? I mean, it gets crazy. So think about it. Well, anyway, Alex Rosenberg, for example, read his book, The Atheist's Guide to Reason. I think Daniel Dennett has done some similar things. And I think even Sam Harris has flirted with this idea, if not affirmed it. But let's get back to the mad scientist here. Replace the mad scientist with physics and chemistry. Replace the mad scientist with God or anything else. If you do that, you've got the exact same rationality problems, but for different reasons. However, with that said, let's shift gears. Since humanity does possess the ability to rationally infer and affirm knowledge claims, And remember, we know this is true because to argue against it, right? To argue, to offer an argument against it, to offer an argument otherwise would be to affirm it, right? If one is going to argue against the premise that we can rationally infer and affirm knowledge claims, then they will be doing the exact thing that they claim we can't do. So we know that we possess libertarian freedom then to think and take certain steps while deciding what we ought to affirm and believe. So really, you see, so much of this comes down to oughtness. And really then, if you're familiar with the moral argument, we're talking about moral responsibility. Here, I'm talking about rational responsibility. Are you rationally responsible, or is something else determining what you will believe and how you think? And since libertarian freedom seems to be metaphysically impossible if humanity is nothing but physical stuff, we can rationally infer that humanity is more than merely the physical. But remember, the naturalist assumes that everything about humanity is physical or material or simply nature. And they assume that all things about humanity are caused and determined by things other than humanity. So this exhaustive determinism implies that a human being's thoughts and beliefs are causally determined by external factors. So it's easy to see then why determinists like Sam Harris claim that choices up to humanity are illusory. They're just nothing but an illusion. Now, this illusion would include, of course, the choice to follow or not to follow epistemic rules. However, the implication of this is that determinists, if they're correct, would not have, they wouldn't have come to their conclusions about determinism based on their intelligence or by choosing to examine the evidence to infer the best explanation. Quite the contrary, their view, their very conclusion about determinism would simply be caused and determined by external factors, perhaps chemistry and physics, things that are not aimed at truth. And they have nothing to do with rationality, the process of acquiring reason-based knowledge, critical thinking, or logic, or any of that. If exhaustive determinism is true, there is no free will involved in assessing, judging, or evaluating whether one thought is better than another or not. Again, see the range of alternative options. When you're going to judge something, you need to, or evaluate something as good or bad, better or worse. Are you a judger? Can you make that judgment, or is something else doing it for you? Do you have the ability to weigh, judge, and evaluate one hypothesis is better than another or not? And if not, then you can only assume, right? If there's only one thing, let's say you're judging a hypothesis, and the only thing compatible with your nature at the time is to judge it as good. How do you know it's good when you did not have an ability to judge it as anything other than good? You simply don't know. You're at an epistemic loss. You cannot rationally affirm your view because you could not rationally infer that it was good because that was just the only thing you could do. John Searle has argued about this and does a great job. He's an atheist, and he is one of the few atheistic naturalists out there that says, look, we cannot dismiss libertarian freedom when it comes to thinking. If we do, rationality makes no difference. He says it doesn't even come into play. Thank you, John Searle, who's recognized as one of the world's leading philosophers of mind. He gets it. Evan Fales is another atheist who gets it. He's like, even though they can't explain how we got it, how we have free will, and how we have libertarian freedom, atheism wrong, but at least they understand that you got to have libertarian freedom, or else say goodbye to rationality and any knowledge gained through rationality. So they would not dispute premise 3 of the free thinking argument against naturalism. They would probably go after 2, but I don't think they're going to have any luck there. Anyway, let me keep going here. If you do not think of the mad scientists again and replace the mad scientists with physics and chemistry or God or whatever. If something other than you determines you to weigh, judge, and evaluate certain concepts, ideas, premises, arguments, propositions, then you're simply in no position to know if this external force is causing you to think and weigh and judge and evaluate correctly or not. And this is the case because as soon as you try to evaluate this very concept, once again, remember, it's not you doing it. It's not up to you how you evaluate this concept. It's not up to you when you start thinking about the mad scientist. If you want to hold to determinism and you're trying to find a way out to get out of the mad scientist thought experiment, guess what? The mad scientist is doing that for you. You're not doing it, you see. So this is the problem for the self, the thing you call I. And this, again, this is why some atheists are saying, well, the self doesn't exist. Well, who said that? You know, I mean, it's crazy to say that I don't exist. I mean, so much for Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am. I think Descartes is right about that. Anyway, William Lane Craig, one of my guy that's probably sharpened me more than anybody else, he makes an important observation. It's kind of a long quote, but I want to read this to you because I think he hit the ball out of the park here. He said, and now what's interesting is he wrote this in response to Calvinism, but I'm using it in response to naturalism, and I do use it against anybody who holds to exhaustive determinism of any stripe or any flavor. But Craig says this, quote, there is a sort of dizzying, self-defeating character to determinism. For if one comes to believe that determinism is true, one has to believe that the reason he has come to believe it is simply that he was determined to do so. One has not, in fact, been able to weigh the arguments pro and con, right, know your range of options, and freely make up one's mind on that basis. The difference between the person who weighs the arguments for determinism and rejects them and the person who weighs them and accepts them is wholly that one was determined by causal factors outside himself to believe and the other not to believe. And when you come to realize that your decision to believe in determinism was itself determined, and that even your present realization of that fact right now is likewise determined, a sort of vertigo sets in. For everything that you think, even this very thought itself, is outside your control. Determinism could be true, but it's very hard to see how it could ever be rationally affirmed since its affirmation undermines the rationality of its affirmation, end quote. So, while it seems intuitively obvious that humans possess libertarian freedom and make at least some real choices after deliberating among a range of genuinely available alternative options, at least some of the time, at least occasionally, I'm not saying we always have that ability, but at least sometimes, then the person who denies this freedom to think ultimately must reject rationality and the knowledge or justified beliefs gained via the process of rational inference and deliberation. So, a naturalist affirming that determinism is true has no grounds to rationally conclude his affirmation. You see, there is no tether to reality. No tether. There's no justification. In fact, it's utterly a non-rational statement when the determinist concludes that determinism is true or asserts that determinism is true. Now, this is a major problem for the determinist because, as I say in my book, one cannot conclude a model of reality that destroys the method he used to reach his conclusion. So let me quickly, just in summary, give you the argument again. Premise one says if naturalism is an immaterial soul, that simply means that if naturalism is true, then nature is all that exists. Premise two, if human nature does not include an immaterial soul, then humans do not possess libertarian freedom. That means that if everything is nature and only nature, then everything about humanity would be caused and determined by the forces and past events of nature. Premise three, if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Bottom line, if something outside of human control causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief. Well, I said that was the bottom line. Here's a bottom line. You cannot decide what you ought to believe if someone or something else determines what you will believe. Uh, Premise 4, humans do possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Now, that premise is simply communicating the fact that you do have the ability to infer and affirm true beliefs. You've got what it takes to do that. Now, to argue otherwise, you can state otherwise, but to argue otherwise is self-defeating. It's like telling me, I cannot utter one single sentence in the English language. Should you believe me? Of course not. It's self-defeating. It's self-referentially defeating. To affirm the opposite, to say, I have rationally concluded that I cannot rationally infer and affirm knowledge claims, is just as self-defeating. It's absurd, and to affirm the opposite is to have it blow up in your face and destroy your entire case. So since these 4 premises seem to be true, we can rationally declare that the next 3 deductive conclusions are true, right? 5, therefore humans possess libertarian freedom. 6, therefore human nature includes an immaterial or supernatural soul. And 7, therefore naturalism is false. So that is the free thinking argument and the free thinking argument against naturalism. If you want me to, I can spend some time defending the abductive conclusion, or maybe we should just talk a little bit about the free thinking argument so far. What do you think? No comment?
Dr. Stratton, could I ask you, this actually is going way, way back to the beginning.
Okay.
But what do you think is the best way to describe God's freedom? With using the 2 definitions of libertarian free will that you put out at the beginning, do you think it's correct to say that, for example, if we would affirm something like God cannot lie, are we affirming something like God is free in the source by the sourcehood definition, but he's not free in the sense of the principle of alternative possibilities because lying is not one? Would that be a correct way to describe God's freedom?
It's a great question, Isaac. And by the way, are you in the Molinism group?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, now I know your name.
Yeah.
So it's a pleasure to finally meet you face to face, kind of.
Same here.
So fantastic question. I think God does have libertarian freedom in some senses and only has sourcehood in other senses. So in my book, I point out that God is love. So I think he cannot do other than love any other being. God simply loves, and he doesn't have the ability to not love. However, so he doesn't have the principle of alternative possibilities there. But nothing other than God is causally determining God to be love. If people say, well, God's nature is God. I mean, so God just simply is love, 1 John 4:8. But nothing is causally determining God to be love. That's just the way he is. And so he's free in the sourcehood sense when it comes to love. And then I argue that the best kind of love is when you're not causally determined to love. And so then God has to, since God can't causally, if God created contingent beings to have a nature that is love like his is, then he would be causally determining us. So he gives us the principle of alternative possibilities when it comes to love, and that's what leads to evil and makes hell a reality. And I could go on and on about that. But to answer your question, I think there's times when God, so when it comes to love, he's free in the sourcehood sense. When it comes to, he's got the principle of alternative possibilities in the mere fact that the fine-tuning argument is true. God has the ability to fine-tune the initial conditions of the Big Bang in multiple, perhaps an infinite, I don't know, many ways. So those are all things he could have done. In fact, he didn't have to create at all. So he could have created or not created. And, Kirk McGregor has said that there's multiple, it seems, multiple different possible and feasible worlds that are on the top shelf of the best kinds of worlds to create. And so perhaps this isn't the best possible world, but it could be one among a series of best possible worlds. So yeah, I think God can create different worlds or none at all, and in that sense, He's got the ability to do otherwise. But does that make sense, Isaac?
Yeah, it does.
Cool.
And then one more thing. This isn't so much a question for you, but just kind of making other people who may be watching this aware of your work. I know that sometimes in discussion of free will and the argument that you've presented, I've heard some Calvinists respond by saying that the way in which God determines things is not the same kind of causation that physical determinism would have. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that you guys have actually posted articles about that on your free thinking website.
Yeah.
And so in particular, who's the French philosopher that you guys have interacted with recently?
Yeah, Guillaume Bignon.
Yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So for anyone interested, I know that I've benefited from some of that, and I think other people watching this might benefit as well.
Yeah, I've got a little bit on our website, freethinkingministries.com, interacting with Guillaume Bignon. I do think that he is a brilliant philosopher, but he's an exhaustive divine determinist. I call him an ED guy, EDD. And so he and I, he wrote a book called Excusing Sinners and Blaming God. And I interact with that book quite a bit in my book, and interact directly with his own words several times. And they're both published by the same publisher, which is interesting. But where was I going with that? Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Guillaume, but he calls me his friendly enemy. But he and I made several videos going back and forth, and you can find 2 of those videos on the Free Thinking Ministries YouTube channel, and then you can find another one on Braxton Hunter's YouTube channel, at the Trinity YouTube channel, and then one on Leighton Flowers' YouTube channel. So, but I would recommend watching the 2 that were on the Free Thinking Ministries YouTube channel, interacting with Guillaume. But yeah, I don't care how things are causally determined. I just simply point out that if it's by physical means or supernatural means or whatever, if all my thoughts and beliefs are causally determined by something or someone other than me, then I'm at an epistemic loss to rationally affirm any of my beliefs. So, but thanks, Isaac. Any other questions?
I'm trying to figure out how to word this as I'm thinking through it, but could one evade the problem of external causation as a naturalist if they say that because the self is material, that therefore material forces aren't an external causation?
Yeah, I've heard one person, I said, well, everything about you, all of your thoughts are causally determined by the forces and events of nature. And his response was, I am nature. Or no, he said, I am the laws of nature. I'm like, no, you're not. so that's what he's trying to do there, I think. So the fact remains, if you believe you're a thinking thing, do you have access? If somebody says they don't have access to their thoughts, I don't even know what to do with that person anymore. I think they've just become unreasonable and irrational. No, who wants to do that? I've not really heard any academic try to say something like that. So the fact remains that if you're a thinking thing, everybody says, well, I think this and I know this. All right, okay, what do you mean by I? And how do you know? Do you think that, or is something else making you think it? And if so, how do you know that's any good? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that I ask. So do you think, with your question in mind, do you think that is a problem for them, or would you want to follow up with that?
I mean, I guess you having said that, even if one wants to argue that the I, that the self is material, that that's still governed by something external, because
Yeah,
everything that is material is not just freely floating through the material world, but is subject to the laws of nature, I guess,
right.
is the
Now
material.
and yeah, so that's where, I mean, most atheists are going to say that. Now, guys like John Searle and Evan Fales, to their credit, who I believe they're both going to affirm naturalism. And by the way, uh, Peter Van Inwagen, a fantastic theologian and philosopher, he's a physicalist that believes that the soul doesn't exist, but he's one of the world's greatest advocates for libertarian freedom. He just doesn't know how to make sense of it, and neither do. And Peter Van Inwagen's a Christian at Notre Dame University, and but Evan Fales and John Searle are atheist philosophers, and they would believe that naturalism is true, but they're like, but somehow, even though I'm just a physical thing, I've still got free will. We've got to, or say goodbye to rationality. Um, so if I were an atheist, I would go after premise two of the argument. But they never want to do that. They all, I mean, in my experience after defending this for 8 years now, they want to go after premise three. So yeah, I think that, I'm showing my cards right now. If I were them, I'd be going after two. But I don't. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess sort of. Maybe you hit on this earlier when you were talking about how some atheists actually deny the existence of themselves, which is, I mean, I guess the most literal form of self-defeating.
Great. I'm going to steal that from you. Yeah, thank you.
Is it
But
even
Ben
conceivable?
Zachariah. Okay.
Yeah.
Say that.
Is it even conceivable for any form of self to exist materially? Like, or what do you think?
Uh, I have a hard time saying how that could be the case, because we're talking about intentionality, being able to think of and about things. And that's why Alex Rosenberg rejects it. He says, just as I can't remember exactly what he says in The Atheist Guide to Reality. I think it's something like, just as my laptop doesn't think of or about anything, neither do I, or something like that. Or neither do humans, because he just sees us as glorified laptops. And so I mean, if it is possible, that seems more miraculous than having a soul. I mean, if God, maybe it's logically possible for God to make a completely physical thing that can think of and about things. But I fail to see how that's even possible, because physical things aren't of or about other physical things. But I have the ability to think of my wife, who's not here, and about my son, who's not here right now, and about our last year's vacation, and plan for next year's vacation, whatever. If we can think of and about things where, this chair doesn't think of the table, or it's not of or about the table, but we are of or about things. So anyway, I think after I read Joel Rosenberg's Atheist Guide to Reality, my faith was strengthened like never before, because it just did seem like a exercise in self-refutation, like you said, because he even refuted his own existence. So yeah.
Thanks.
But, yeah, thank you, Ben.
Do you think we could also add, I know this is typically presented in terms of argument for a soul, but I think it's accomplishing, when you're arguing for a soul, in some sense, you could, if you think that argument is strong enough, you could think that it's an argument against the idea that yourself could be material. So, like, for example, thinking of someone who would want to argue based on the unity of consciousness, that you can't just be identified with your brain. Um,
Right.
and
Yeah.
but I think if you for whatever reason think that that's a strong enough argument for a soul, that might also be strong enough to say that you just can't we can't picture the experience of ourselves as anything physical, because it's not just a brain that would have trouble explaining the unity of consciousness. It's any, I mean, pick any kind of supercomputer you want, you're going to run into the same problems that
I
lead people to posit a soul for our existence in the first place.
hmm Yeah, I agree. And I like J.P. Moreland's, it's kind of like a mini ontological argument for the self. And just by merely arguing if it's possible for you to survive the destruction of your brain and body. So you say, is it possible if I can strongly conceive of myself as a thing that could survive the destruction of my brain and body, even if I don't, he says, then that demonstrates that there's something about me that is not identical with my brain and my body. So it's just it's an interesting argument. I do. I have that on my website. I don't. Oh yeah, I did a YouTube video recently talking about that too. But I like what you were talking about too, the unity of consciousness. That's a good argument. Anybody else? John, you still there?
I am here.
So I see you're wearing a Liberty shirt. Did you go to Liberty as well?
I did.
So is that undergrad?
I have an MDiv from Liberty and an undergrad as well.
Nice. Liberty and Biola. You gonna go after a doctorate?
I'm too old, tired.
Nah.
My mother
You
has
know, if you don't care about accreditation right now, that I think they are moving to accreditation. But I am a professor at Trinity Theological Seminary. You can get a doctorate there, and it's pretty cool, pretty good deal. So
at one
if you're
point
interested-
that was my plan, but
oh really?
my mother recently moved in with us.
Uh,
She has dementia.
Man, that's gonna be a full-time job.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, I bet. I'm sorry.
It's part of the plan, I would assume.
Yeah, yeah. I talk in my book. I think one of my favorite parts about it is in the last chapter. I demonstrate how the essential ingredients of mere Molinism. So I differentiate between what I call mere Molinism, which is simply that God has middle knowledge and humans have libertarian freedom. I argue for both of those. So I argue that it must be true, at minimum, that mere Molinism is true. And then I argue for soteriological Molinism, that you simply have to add one more ingredient to the mix, and that is simply that God is omnibenevolent and loves and desires everybody to flourish. So if you got God has middle knowledge, humans are free, and God is omnibenevolent, then I say that soteriological Molinism follows. But if one wants to reject soteriological Molinism, they can still be a 5-point Calvinist and hold to mere Molinism. But then what I do is I take those three ingredients and I compare. I show how almost every argument in Dr. Craig's cumulative case and more assume at least one of the essentials for mere Molinism. Some hold to all three of soteriological Molinism, and I use soteriological Molinism to defeat the problems of moral evil, natural evil, even divine hiddenness, and gratuitous evil. So in one fell swoop, I think if Molinism is true, say goodbye to the greatest objection raised against the nature of God. So now, and I bring that up because you're talking about suffering and hard times, pain, problem of evil. You're facing it right now, problem of suffering. And I get into scripture there too and talk about how Paul describes that these light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. 2 Corinthians 4:17. So I hope, there's book can bring some practical and just encouragement to people, folks going through hard times. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll be praying for you. Be praying for you, John, and your mom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Tim, brother,
Yeah.
thank you so very much. Sorry about the connection issues initially.
That's all right. We got it working.
It's
No,
true.
I'm honored. Thanks for inviting me, and it was good to finally talk to you and Ben and Isaac and anybody else that was here. See Lauren and Colin and Tony. Tony was there.
Do you know
Unbelievable.
Tony?
Tony Vance, yeah,
It's a small world.
unbelievable.
He's from the same small town that I am.
Get out of here.
Yep. He and I aren't close, but we know each other.
That's awesome. Well, I love that guy.
Chan Arnett?
Is Chan here?
No, surprisingly, I kind of thought he would be.
Yeah.
He's on a different route now. He's doing calisthenics.
Uh,
I don't know.
Chan, I love Chan. He's a great guy.
Dr. Stratton, we really
Yes, sir.
appreciated having you this evening. It's good, like I said, seeing you face to face and talking with you. I've appreciated it this evening.
Well, thank you, Isaac. Now I have a face and a voice to go with any comments you might add in the Molinism group. I don't get there as much as I used to, but I try to share something, once a week or so. So
Yeah.
Isaac's been
Well-
with us for 7 years. Is that right? 7? Something like real close.
Like that. 6 or 7.
When we started Ratio Christi at Marshall, Isaac was our first student, first president. Now look, he's all grown up, married, job.
Oh, all grown up.
Yeah. Can't get rid
I don't know. I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So,
Buddy, I'm 56 and I've yet to figure it out. I'm not sure apologetics was a wise choice at this point.
yeah, right. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Oh,
No, we're doing this because we want to make a difference in this world for God's glory, right?
that's the idea.
Yeah, it's not for the money, that's for sure. Yeah. Some things are more important.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ben,
Well,
so
God bless you guys.
you finally hooked up with us, brother.
Yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Tim, thank you so much. Lauren, finish your homework.
See you guys later.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, Ben, it's nice seeing you again, even if it is just on a virtual meeting.